Hello and welcome to UpLevel Living Transformation Tuesday. I'm your host, health coach John Garcia. If you're watching live, today is Tuesday, February the 11th. I'm in Florida where it's like 75 degrees and beautiful, maybe a little too warm. I'm not sure where you are, but I hope your winter is going by quickly enough, but not too fast, right? This world just keeps getting way too hot. Um, our average temperature should be much lower right now. We're averaging temperatures that are like April temperatures, and we're in, February. So enjoyed it last night. Took a nice jog all the way to this place near my house where the sun sets, and you could see all the way like to California. It feels like it's just an amazing, way to end your day. Hope you guys are taking time to do things like that to enrich yourself and just be in nature and just be outdoors, right? So today's topic is going to be a little tough. I have an outline and I'm hoping to stick to it, but I know that I'm going to go off on some tangents because this is not this clean and easy and how-to thing. This is about spirituality today. And again, I'm going to stress spirituality because religion is going to come up because a lot of the texts that we're going to read, come from the Bible. And I'm a Christian, so I'm going to refer to New Testament and just putting it out there because if any of that bothers you or offends you, I understand. And you're welcome to your own beliefs. And this is not about converting anybody or trying to impose my beliefs on you. This is about really a conversation that I wanted to have because as a health coach, my whole way of winning is to transform your habits, right? So if I can get you to start new healthy habits, you can do something that becomes sustainable and becomes a lifestyle. So if you're just trying to diet and just trying to exercise, but you don't change the habit that support the diet and exercise, you will always fall back on your habits. So if the habits are bad or don't support those healthy habits you want, it's not going to work out. That's why 98% of people who diet gain all the weight back after 6 months. That's why most people are frustrated and they're just trying and trying, but they're not living this congruent lifestyle. And so I picked up this book, Russell Brand. A lot of people know him. He's a famous actor, and he's recovering from quite a few addictions, but 14 years clean from some of the heavier drugs that he was doing. So it's recovery, freedom from our addictions. And the reason why I wanted to do this topic today, habits or addictions, is because if I'm coaching someone through habits, what if they actually have an addiction? So I'm not an addiction coach and I'm not, trained to cure addictions, but I need to know what I'm working with and you need to know what you're working with, because what if our, sweet tooth is actually an addiction to sugar, right? What if our, whatever you're dealing with that you call a bad habit is actually an addiction? What's the difference between a habit and an addiction? A habit, I think, can be good or bad, right? A habit, you can have good habits, and here's an interesting thing, like you can have a habit of going to the gym, and that's good, right? I would tell you that would be a great habit to have. But then what about when that habit becomes just this infatuation or this addiction, right? You're just going all the time, nonstop. You're putting other things aside that you should be doing. You're not spending any time with your family or doing anything else. So once you're completely consumed by a habit, I think is when it becomes an addiction. So even though the gym is a healthy thing, it's become all consuming and now it's become an addiction. So I think addictions ultimately consume your entire life in a way that is unproductive. And then obviously certain substance abuses and addictions, then they also are very dangerous and they can lead to, death. So I think I wanted to put that out there first and trying to kind of understand that what we may call a habit or a bad habit, we're glossing it over in a bit, and if we were truly honest, we can say that it's an addiction. He writes here in the back of the book, this is the age of addiction, a condition so endemic, so all-encompassing and ubiquitous that unless you are fortunate enough to be an extreme case like he was, you probably don't even know that you have it. What unhealthy habits and attachments are holding your life together? Um, so right there on that back page, he's already talking about habits and what unhealthy habits are holding your life together. The addiction disguised, if you will, in a habit. Um, and so if I'm going to talk about transformation, to be a transformational health coach, I'm going to try and get you to create new habits. So what is the transformation part? The transformation part is a complete change in the appearance or character of something or someone. That's a definition I looked up. And then I looked it up, another definition that said the same thing, a complete change in appearance or character of something or someone. Sorry about that. Especially so that the thing or person is improved. So transformation is that complete and total change, but for the purposes of improvement, okay? Now, in order to transform, we know we have to change our habits, and we use a definition of transformation as the continual process of letting go. And I never really looked at it this way until I read all these other books. When you let go, when you completely let go, another word for that would be surrendering, right? When you surrender, you let go. And we're going to talk a lot about, well, we're going to talk about surrender today in terms of overcoming addictions and changing bad habits. So I've explained a little bit about why I wanted to take on this topic today, and really it started from this book. Now, a lot of times in my health coaching, I teach an 80-20 approach. I teach an 80-20 approach, meaning if 80% of the time you're doing the right thing with your diet and your exercise, and you do that every week consistently, in about 12 weeks, you will develop a new habit. It takes about 66 days. The thing with addiction is, if it's a substance abuse, that doesn't really work. You can't do cocaine just twice a week and be fine the other 5 days. You can't, drink and binge drink 2 days a week and not drink the other 5 days and be okay, right? It's kind of an all or nothing situation, and that's what makes it so incredibly challenging, because there is no 80-20. There's no like I can just leave a little bit of that in my life and I'll be okay. And that, I think, is the self-talk that we give ourselves a lot of times, the way that we rationalize it and the way that we think that we can control it. But we know deep down inside that we can't control it. And that's what this book, it blew me away. Russell Brand, I didn't really know what to expect, but he's really talking about the 12 steps. And like, we've heard about the 12 steps, or you've done the 12 steps, and one of the biggest things that happen in the 12 steps, or we're gonna just really go over the first 3 steps, just kind of like a 10,000 foot view, or whatever you want to call it. I'm not gonna get too deep into it, but I want to kind of go through these 3, because at the end of this, what I want to do is, I created this, I have the 80-20 approach that I just said doesn't work for addiction. But what I want to try to introduce is an 80-20 approach to transform your mind, to transform the way you see things. Because here's a verse from the Bible, Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So be transformed by the renewing of your mind. If we renew our minds, we can be transformed. And so what that means is what Stephen Covey calls a paradigm, the way we see things, the way we believe things. In my health coaching, we always start with what? The why beneath the why, right? The purpose, the identity, aligning behaviors to beliefs. So that has to be very clear. And if our mindset is still believing that we can overcome something that we have not been able to overcome with all the information and knowledge that you have, you've only been able to get so far with that bad habit, let's call it. So what is it going to take to get beyond that? Are you going to try harder? Are you going to learn more? Or are you going to, push through? He talks about that and how that never worked for him. It never worked for me. You know, we all have challenges. It's funny. It's not funny. One of the things he says is we're all on the scale of addiction. Everybody's on the scale of addiction. I think it's true because we're all human and we live in the world. So we have carnal desires and flesh. And, you know, from sex to drugs to alcohol to any substance that makes you feel better and numbs some pain of reality, you know, it's super powerful. And there's an actual physical reaction in our body. We smoke cigarettes and we can't stop because we're addicted to the nicotine. You know, so I do believe that everyone is on the scale of addiction, and food can be an addiction, and sugar can be an addiction. And a lot of times these are things that we are using to numb a pain. We're using to ignore a situation. So that verse I just read from the Bible, from Romans 12:2, transforming, renewing the mind, it says, you know, don't be conformed to this world. And this is interesting because this Bible was written 1700 years ago, but it's like exactly what's going on today. The word world is often used in the New Testament to refer to the world system, or the way that every human being lives by default. Holy crap. You know, like those are habits. What you default to is your habit. And there's a way that every human being lives by default. Like we're naturally lazy. We're naturally going to overeat. We're naturally going to, you know, take the path of least resistance. And that's the default. If you don't live with intention, you will default to that same quagmire, that same swamp. You know, marriages naturally stagnate, and relationships naturally stagnate. There has to be, you know, an action. So it's amazing that, you know, here it is, you know, 1700 years later, and the word world is often used, you know, to refer to the world system of the way that every human being lives by default. And worldly living is what? It says desires of the flesh. So we just spoke about, you know, the reason why we're all on the addiction scale is because the flesh has a response. You know, it triggers your response, and that response, whatever that you take in, triggers also a reward, and that reward is usually some kind of, you know, endorphin release, you know, a feel-good response, and of course you want more of that. And sugar does that, and drugs does that, and sex does that, and, you know, all of these exterior, you know, forces on your body. So instead, he urges us to be transformed from the inside out. Specifically, he writes that we must change in how we think, to have our minds renewed so that we can begin to understand God's will for our lives. So with that, I could segue into this, because I really didn't expect Russell Brand, you know, to be so upright, so, you know, forthcoming about his faith. In my book, The Transformation Manual, I have my faith and spirituality pretty much throughout the book. And the last chapter of the book is, you know, healthy spirituality. Sorry, I know the light and the glare. But, you know, in this chapter, I write one of my favorite verses where it says, self-help is no help at all. Self-sacrifice is the way, my way, to saving yourself, your true self. Sacrifice is surrender. You know, sacrifice is giving up something, you know, good or bad, but for something better. You know, you may even perceive a sacrifice as you're giving away, you know, like let's say you're sacrificing not going to McDonald's. You know, you feel like it's a sacrifice that you're not having a Big Mac. Oh my God, I got to give up this milkshake. It feels like a sacrifice. But you're doing it because you know there's a greater reward. And guess what? It really is a greater reward. You just got to push through that, again, that selfish carnal desires for something that actually has a real trigger, a real response in your body. You don't, it doesn't make it up. I mean, the food companies know we're addicted to sugar, and they put it in everything, and that's why. As you guys join the call, I welcome you. But because this is all being recorded, and, you know, we're just going to kind of keep on moving. But if I do ask a question, please, you're more than welcome to respond and comment. And you can ask questions also as we go along. I think it'll help anyone who watches the video at any time. So thank you and welcome to the call. If you missed anything, of course, this video will stay on the Facebook page and also on our YouTube page. I'm putting all of them on the YouTube page so you can go back and start over. So, you know, we're talking about habits or addictions and kind of recognizing the difference. And then I am going to talk a little bit about, ways that people have overcome addictions, and they do every day. And they do it in different ways, but there's usually this underlying, I'd say more than theme, but way to break through. And the first step is acknowledging, like they always say, admit you have the problem. But the first step is acknowledging more than that. It's acknowledging that you have no control over the power that has control over you. You've done everything you can. I'm 50 years old. If you are in your midlife or 40 or over, you made it this far, I know you've done everything you can to break that bad habit that we now are examining further if it's an actual addiction. And that, my friends, this book I bought a long time ago. Sorry, I'm taking out all these books here. But this book, The Last Addiction, look what it says. Self-help is not enough. Why self-help is not enough? So I just finished quoting scripture, Mark 8:35. Self-help is no help at all. Self-sacrifice is the way, my way, to saving yourself, your true self. You know what the last addiction is? This thing blew me away. Anybody? What the last addiction is? I know it's kind of a weird question because, I mean, what are we really talking about? Like order of addictions? Well, this is really powerful because the last addiction is this. I'm going to read this last little this paragraph here. We all get lost in our workaholism, people-pleasing, and numbing behaviors as we try to escape the pain of life and the messiness of loving others. But some of us appear more whole than others, and that might be the greatest danger of all. It results in the last addiction, which is we rely on ourselves to heal ourselves, and so we miss the healing path. Wow, bam. That is super powerful because the last addiction is actually relying on yourself and believing that you can do it, because that's the message in this world, that you can do it. But it's a lie, because if you could do it, you would have done it. And if you could do it, you wouldn't be stuck in your mess. And so the very first step is not only recognizing the problem, but that you have no control over it. Let me tell you, for any intellectual, and I know I have a lot of intellectual people on this page, meaning we're all smart, but meaning that they're looking for deeper meaning and they're looking for, answers. This is tough to do. It's tough to admit. It's super tough to admit. It's the last addiction for a reason. You don't want to let go of the fact that you can't control this. You're helpless. Self-help is no help at all. You've done it. Now, I'm coaching you guys in health and wellness, and yeah, so you're looking beyond yourself to get help. That's a good step. But I can also only take you so far. When it comes to addiction, there's only one thing beyond this last addiction, and that's a higher power. So, as a Christian, for me, it's Jesus. If you're Jewish, if you're Muslim, even, Russell Brand talks about the guy who introduced him to this stuff was an atheist. So, I mean, the higher power it's awesome that it's actually called that. So I'll be upset. Why don't you just call it God? Well, it's still God, but it's a higher power because there's a power that has control over you, but there's a higher power. That power that has control of you is not at the top of the food chain. There's a higher power. You just haven't surrendered to it. And you're still trying to control it on what you know and what you can do. And you're only going to get up to there. You're not going to be the higher power, obviously, because this thing has control over you, whatever it is. So super powerful stuff. First step, right? We don't have control over this anymore. It's unmanageable. I mean, that's exactly how he writes it in the book. Let me just skip to this page real quick, 26. So step one means you can change, okay? It means surveying the landscape of your life, your family relationships, your working life, your sexual behavior, your eating, your use of your phone, drugs and alcohol, the way you spend money, and asking, is the question, am I happy with this? Is this how I want to live? If there's a behavioral problem that lurches glaringly, obviously looming, then it reveals that here is a step one you can take. I am powerless over this, and my life has become unmanageable. If we're real with ourselves, I think all have this one area in our lives. I mean, and unfortunately, the more it's suppressed and the more it's dealt with, I think the day it just blows up like a volcano, and then you hear about the priests that, just committed atrocities and everything else. We've all sinned and we all fall short of the glory of God. So we all have probably this thing, that we're dealing with. The unmanageability at its heart means that there is a beast in me. It is still in me. I live in negotiation with the shadow side that has to be respected. There is a wound. I believe that this is more than a characteristic of addiction. I think it's part of being human to carry a wound, a flaw. And again, so this is interesting because I said, everyone has something to deal with because we've all been wounded. No one's lived this cherry pick life, and I don't even think that would be even a good thing. We live in this world, we've all been wounded, and sometimes by the people that we love or loved us the most, right? And so that's why, we are all in some kind of form of this scale, like I said, of addiction, and we're all dealing with something because of these wounds and because of this pain. With food, I am powerless over food. If I start eating chocolate, I don't know what I'll stop. He literally was addicted to chocolate. And with sex, if I make sex the panacea, the salve to this pain we discussed earlier, I will soon lose control of my sexual conduct and end up in more pain. If there's something in your life that is causing you a problem and you are aware of it, I bet you've tried everything. He talks about a lot of different things here. Oddly, counterintuitively, in our culture, our individualism and self-centered value, it is by surrendering that we begin to succeed. It is by admitting that we have no power that we can begin the process of accessing all the power we will ever need. So yeah, I think he summed that up pretty good. And the next step, you surrender control, and then, we come to believe that there's a power greater than ourselves, like I said, and that's where faith and spirituality and, your connection, your relationship is what matters. So it's not religious. It's not, going to church. It's not knowing the Bible inside and out necessarily, whatever your faith is, but it's just knowing that higher power is the place where you need to go to because you've done everything else. You've tried everything else. You've read everything else. On my own, we didn't have enough power to change. So we need to access a power that exceeds that. So, the third step here is obviously we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to God as we understand Him. So everyone has their own understanding of it. I think, I don't like to go over 30 minutes. I can probably speak on this for hours. And I think, depending on what kind of feedback and what other, information I can gather here, I think I would definitely like to turn this into its own series between habits and addiction. And I think, being as transparent as I can be, again, so we all have something that we haven't surrendered. And what I want to do in my own life and with you guys is helping you to find the ability to surrender, because I do think that it requires consciousness, it requires effort, it requires a plan. Just saying you're going to surrender, again, the habit is there, and so you fall back onto the bad habit. So I kind of put this promise track together, and what's interesting is in my book, on page 80 is this promise plan, which, to be honest, as I was writing it, this thing just came to me out of nowhere. It doesn't really fit into the book. It just kind of came up and I just stuck it in here. But the promise plan is really just about, it's more than affirmations, it's promises for transformation. So I think it's the way to transform your mind. I think it's the practice of transforming. And this is where I do think the 80-20 can help you get to letting go. Once you let go, once you surrender, once you just think of changes you've made, when you've made that change, it actually felt like it just happened. probably took more than likely took a long time, took a lot of it. But the day you changed, you never went back. Once you change, it's happened in my life with different things. And once I was freed in that moment, I just never was tempted again. It's happened with food, it's happened with, exercise, it's happened with a lot of different things, and it's happened with substances and just a lot of things. The day you say, over, it's just an amazing thing. So these promises, I think, are the reminders and the promises that we need to make to ourselves on a daily basis. So with the last 5 minutes, I'll just kind of go through them real quick. So I never had a promise of surrender in my promise. I have 7 promises. Surrender was one of them. So I'm actually adding surrender as the first promise. If you really take all of these promises together, they're really all an act of surrender. But I want to consciously make surrendering one of the promises. And what I did in the plan is I did add a scripture to each one. So with promises, with surrendering, it's the one that we went over already. It says self-help is no help at all. Self-sacrifice is the way. Surrender. So what I think would work with this is in the morning or at night, when you have really 5 or 10 minutes, that's all we're going to need to do this. Take out your promise track. I'll post this on the page so you can print it, or just email me, John at UpLevel Living, and I can email it to you. You're just going to spend about 5 minutes making these promises to yourself each day. So the first promise is to surrender. The second promise is to have gratitude, to give thanks. A lot of people pray for their problem to be solved. Oh God, take this away from me, this. And really what happens is you're magnifying the problem so much, the problem just gets bigger. It just consumes your whole life. So the prayer really and the gratitude should be just thank you, Lord, that you are you're in these trenches with me, and that, you've made me more than a conqueror, and you go into your own faith and your own words. But the bottom line is giving thanks, being grateful for what you do have. It changes everything. It changes everything from focusing on your problems to focusing on your potential, to focusing on the possibilities. The next promise is faith. It says it's impossible to please God without faith. I go into more detail here onto what you're going to be promising with faith, but basically it's believing in the ability that your higher power has given you, and believing that your higher power has all the power that you need, like it said in the book, in Russell Brand's book. So in Hebrews 11, that it says faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. There's no better definition of faith in the world, right from the Bible. Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. The next promise is integrity. So, if we make promises to other people, we usually keep them. But we make promises to ourselves and break them 10 times a day, right? I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do the other, and we don't do it. Because we have such a high expectation of everyone else, and we have low expectations of ourselves. If we had the same level of expectation on ourselves that we have on other people to act right and be right, we would have more of our shit together. There's no doubt about that. So integrity. Being just real with yourself. The next promise is priority. I always talk about making yourself a priority. Well, it actually starts by making your higher power the priority. By doing that, you actually are making yourself a priority, because God and your higher power never takes away from you. It only adds. It only edifies you. So by putting God first, by putting your higher power first, by doing this in the morning, you are making yourself a priority, because you're going to put everything that's important first. The next promise is compassion, and this is super important because it first applies to you. Have compassion on yourself. Be your own best friend. Stop judging yourself. Stop being guilty. Stop being shamed. Those days are over. Have compassion because you live in this world and you've made some mistakes. And then use the same compassion really for the people around you. We hold a lot of grudges. That's not helping anybody. That's not solving any problems. That could be feeding an addiction, because you are going to self-medicate and not deal with that problem just because you don't have compassion. The next promise is to take action. You're always at a moment of action. So the action, it could be to pivot. meaning try something else. It could be persevere, keep going through it, or it could be go back to that first promise and surrender. Surrendering is an action. You have to willfully surrender. It's not going to passively happen. And the last promise is truth. And it's kind of just being authentic, not hiding behind the mask like I have it here, not trying to, please anyone. Who really cares what anyone else says or thinks if you're trying to do the right thing anyway? You're going to do it in your own way. So I want to, I'm going to try this. I'm going to definitely use this for myself. I'm going to put this on the page for you guys. Again, John at UpLevel Living. If you have any questions, you can ask me there. You can comment on this video, on this post, and let's transform our minds, and let's be willing to surrender to a higher power, because we're only going to take this ball so far down the field. At some point, you need God, you need the higher power to block for you, to clear the path, and you got to run behind them, and don't judge yourself, because we've all fallen short. No one has it all together, and it's an everyday evolving, improving thing. So I pray for you guys. God bless you guys. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next Tuesday on Transformation Tuesday. God bless. Good night.